Mark Walden discusses everybody's secret desires.
The first series of books I worked on was a series called Hive, which is the Higher Institute of Villainous Education. And I've just released the first book in a new series as well called Earthfall. So later on I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Earthfall, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my tips for surviving a potential future alien invasion. But first of all, I want to talk a little bit about Hive and what it was that inspired me to write Hive. I've always loved villains. I love villains. I think they're the most interesting characters you can write. And I think there's a few good reasons for that. For a start off, villains always get all the best lines. All the best dialogue. Things like, "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die," or "I find your luck safe, disturbing." These are great lines. If you ask an actor what they would rather play, a hero or a villain, they will always tell you that they would rather play the villain. And that's because actors love to have all the best lines. The other thing that villains always have is the best costumes. Let's take, for example, my favourite villain of all time. Someone who I think you'll probably all have heard of, Darth Vader. Now, Darth Vader's costume is kind of like a cross between a ninja and a samurai and a cyborg in space, which is cool. But then we look at the hero's costume. And the hero in this case, of course, is Luke Skywalker. Now, Luke's costume is more kind of 70s disco farm boy. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I know which of those two costumes I would prefer. I'm definitely going with the space ninja samurai look. It's cooler. The other thing that villains have is all the best stuff, the best gadgets, the best vehicles, the best places to live. Darth Vader lives on the Death Star, which is a space station the size of a small moon that can destroy an entire planet with a single shot. Harry Potter? Cupboard under the stairs. Now, I don't know about you guys, but again, I know where I would rather be living. I think it's just villains have cooler stuff. Another great advantage of being a villain is that you can be essentially immortal. And I know you're probably thinking, well, Mark, what do you mean by that? I've seen villains die all the time. Villains always seem to die at the end of the story. Yeah, but a good villain always finds a way to come back. Somehow. Whenever you're writing a really good villain, because they're the best characters, because they're the most interesting characters, you never quite want to completely kill them off. You want to leave the door open just a crack, so maybe somehow they can find a way to come back. And that's because villains are the most interesting characters. I mean, some of you in this room, some of you, are approaching a point in your lives where people are going to start asking you, what do you want to do? What career would you like? What job would you choose? Now, the people who ask you that are going to be hoping that you say something like doctor or teacher or lawyer or something like that. Don't. I want you to look that person straight in the eye and say, actually, I'm thinking about a career in trans-global supervillain. Now, it's what's known as a non-traditional career choice, but it is a growth industry. Just think how cool it would be. Just, if you rule the world, you can make any law you want. Any law. So say, for example, anybody who gives out homework, immediate death sentence. Justin Bieber, immediate death sentence. Justin Bieber, on that note, I was particularly impressed because obviously, knows he threw up on stage this week, which was, I thought, hilarious. But what I was particularly impressed with was the way he kept singing while vomiting. I didn't know you could do that. I think it's amazing, such talent. So yeah, those are definite advantages to being a villain. Definite advantages to being a villain. But to give you a slightly better idea of what I think constitutes a great villain, I'd like to sort of talk about who some of my particular favourites are. But while I'm doing that, I'd like you to have a think about who your favourites are. And after I've told you some of mine, I'll ask you to stick your hands up for me and tell me who some of your favourites are, and we'll talk about some of them. Now, my favourite of all time, I've already mentioned him, the man, Darth Vader. Now, when I first saw Star Wars, I was 5 years old, in 1977. So you can probably work out, I've just hit that big, unfortunate birthday. And I can remember sitting there in that cinema thinking, watching this movie, I've never seen anything quite like it. And there was this spaceship with this gleaming white corridor. And down the end of the corridor there were these doors, but there were soldiers lined up along the corridor, and they were all pointing their guns and their blasters at this door. Something was coming. You didn't know what, but you knew it was bad from the looks on their faces. And then suddenly this door explodes and a shower of sparks and smoke fills the corridor. And stormtroopers come pouring in, blasting away. And then behind them, sweeping in his long, flowing black cloak, Darth Vader. And I can remember thinking, that's how you make an entrance. I'm going to try that at school. That's brilliant. But just think how cool it would actually be to be Darth Vader. At the moment, you guys should be sat at the breakfast table in the morning, and your mum or your dad or whoever looks after you will come down and say, so have you done your homework? You say, yeah, I've done my homework. You're Darth Vader. We sat at the breakfast table in the morning, and your mum or your dad or whoever looks after you comes down and says, so have you done your as you just sit at the breakfast table force choking is a very useful day-to-day ability. I would encourage all of you to give into the dark side. Absolutely give into the dark side. Who else do I love? Lex Luthor. Now, can anybody here stick their hand and tell me who Lex Luthor's arch enemy is? Yeah. See? No? No? Anybody? Yeah?
Spider-Man?
No? Yeah? Superman. Quite right. Let me tell you this. Actually, think about something. An invulnerable, super strong alien comes to Earth and starts telling people what they can and cannot do. Now, does that sound like a hero to you? But that's Superman. Superman's an alien, super strong, invulnerable. All that Lex Luthor's actually doing is protecting the Earth from alien invasion. He's actually a really good guy. Gets a bad press. And actually what we should do, I think, is look a bit more closely at the hero. We're told that heroes are people who should be admired and respected. We should look up to them. We should aspire to be like them. Okay, well fine. Let's take a slightly closer look at Superman. Clark Kent, a man who every morning stands in front of the bedroom mirror and says to himself, today, tights, then pants. This is not a normal thing to do, okay? Especially if you're a man. Okay? If you ever meet a man who puts on tights and then pants in the morning, be afraid, be very, very afraid, okay? Another villain that I love from the same universe, because I'm a bit of a comic book geek, from the DC Comics universe, the Joker. I love the Joker because he's colourful, he's funny, he's unpredictable, he's a homicidal maniac, but you can't have everything. And I think he's a great example of how you can make a great villain. Because with the Joker, all they did was they took the hero, of course in this case, Batman, and they just made his exact mirror image. Batman's all about order, discipline, and control, and respect for the law. The Joker is not, he's the exact opposite. He's unpredictable, he's chaotic, he's great. And again, let's take a slightly closer look at the hero here, shall we? The person we're supposed to admire and respect. Batman. Now I know what you're thinking, what could possibly be uncool about Batman? But let me put it to you a slightly different way. Batman, Bruce Wayne, a multi-billionaire who every night gets dressed up in a black leather outfit and goes out and beats up socially disadvantaged people. This is not, again, a normal thing to do. These heroes are really weird people, and when we're told we should respect them. Who else do I have? Sauron. Now, can anybody stick their hand up again? Tell me what book Sauron is the villain from? Yeah?
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings, quite right. Now, throughout the Lord of the Rings, we have the entire cast of characters all running around Middle-earth, all desperately trying to chuck a bit of jewellery into a fire to kill him. But we never actually see, at any point, what Sauron is doing. We know he's in his tower, with his big burning eye at the top, but we never actually see what he's doing. For all we know, he could be sat there, feet up, Watching daytime television? Perhaps a bit of Jeremy Kyle, I don't know. Have a nice cup of tea. Feet up, summoning his dark riders, bring me hobnobs. We don't know, because we never see what he's doing. And I think it points to another great advantage of being a villain, which is that you can be incredibly lazy. Nobody will ever actually look and see what you're doing. They won't know. You can still be incredibly terrifying. You don't have to do anything. It's great. That's what the Daleks. I love the Daleks. The thing I love about the Daleks more than anything else is they're honest. They tell you exactly what they want. Exterminate! They're not lying to anyone, they're being very straightforward and honest and clear. And actually, there is a slight disadvantage to being a Dalek. You know, being an all-conquering alien terror race that can be defeated by a flight of stairs. Brian, what? Stairs? I thought you said this was a bungalow planet. Back on the ship. Slightly less scary, although in fairness, I should point out that in your Daleks, 21st century Daleks, they fly, can't they? And so that makes them slightly more scary than my Daleks, which were sort of trundling around everywhere like angry wheelie bins. So they were less terrifying to have. So those are some of my particular favourites. But now I'd like to ask you to do some of yours. You can stick your hand up for me and tell me some of yours and we'll talk about some of them. Yeah?
Megamind.
Megamind. The thing I liked about Megamind, and for those who don't know, is actually the story of what happens when a supervillain wins. What happens when a supervillain actually defeats the superhero and achieves world domination. And actually it's boring. He hates it. He's got nothing to do. He's run out, he doesn't have an enemy anymore. There's no reason to keep doing what he was doing. And actually, that points out why hero and villain relationships work, because they are counterpoints to each other. They reflect each other. Great villains are often just slightly twisted versions of the characters that they oppose. So if you look at, say, I don't know, the Master in Doctor Who, he is just a twisted version of the Doctor himself. He's an evil version of Doctor himself. But it's interesting to ask you that question, what happens when the villain wins? Because actually the interest comes from the conflict, it doesn't come from anyone actually winning or losing. Yeah. Voldemort, you mean of course he who shall not be named. Yes. Just imagine how cool that would be to have a name that strikes so much terror into people that they won't even speak your name for fear of giving you some kind of additional power or summoning you up somehow. And what's your name? Jade. Okay, Jade. If you do choose a supervillain career, I think you might have to work on the name a little bit. I am the Dark Lord Jade. It's not gonna work. I think it needs something a bit more evil, but we can work on that. The advantage of being a supervillain, of course, is you can choose your own name. You can have your own supervillain name. So we can get it. Yeah.
Classic series Daleks could fly. We see that in their language.
I would bow to, obviously, but your superior Doctor Who knowledge.
The point I was going to say was Moriarty.
Moriarty, again, it's kind of what I was just talking about. The only person who can actually offer an effective foil to Sherlock Holmes is almost his evil equivalent. He has to be just as cunning, just as devious, just as intelligent. Because otherwise there's nothing that can act as a foil to Holmes. In a way, he's almost too powerful. His mind is too powerful, and the only way to offer a foil is to create an evil version of him. And that's kind of what Conan Doyle did with Moriarty. So it's another way of creating a villain, just making a twisted version of the hero. Yes. Nero, for my purposes, Nero is the headmaster of Hive, and Nero is kind of what he's interested in, the thing he's trying to teach his students at Hive, is that villainy should have style. You know, a villain should be stylish. It's not about mugging people or kidnapping people. It's about stealing a nuclear submarine. It's about holding a government to ransom. You know, that's how a villain should operate. They should think big. They should have a flair for the dramatic. And actually, a lot of Hive came from my love of the earlier James Bond movies, and those slightly weird and implausible villains that those movies contained. And Hive is the kind of place where you go to learn how to be one of those kind of villains.